All right, diving in today on a pretty heavy topic.
Yeah.
The murder of Megan Newborough. And you've shared some sources with us on this, and I guess our goal is to kind of try to understand what happened between Megan and this guy.
It's a case that brings up so many different questions about relationships, trust, and potentially missed warning signs.
Before we get into the details of the case, though, I think it's important for people to kind of understand who she was.
Yes.
She was 23, living in Nuneaton, working in HR at a brick manufacturer.
Right.
Seemed like a really vibrant person from everything we've read in these sources. Loving family, lots of friends.
Absolutely.
Just a shame that her life was cut short like this.
Yeah, and that makes it all the more crucial to try and examine the events that led to her death to see if there's anything that we can learn from this tragedy. The other key person in this story is Ross McCullum. He's a 30-year-old lab assistant who worked at the same company as Megan.
Okay, so they met at work, and it sounds like it started out pretty professionally, but quickly turned personal.
Yeah.
And one thing that kind of stood out to me right away is just the sheer volume of communication between them.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, over 3,500 text messages in a short period of time.
Wow.
It's like, what were they even talking about?
That's where things get really interesting and troubling.
Yeah.
The tone of the messages reveals a stark contrast.
Okay.
Megan's messages are very supportive and caring.
Yeah.
Like, she's trying to be there for Ross.
Yeah.
He had shared some stories of a troubled past, alleging trauma, even abuse as a child. So it's natural that someone like Megan, with her kind heart, would want to offer support.
Right.
But then you look at Ross's messages, and it paints a completely different picture.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a darkness there that's hard to ignore.
Exactly. His messages contain violent undertones, misogynistic language. It's jarring to see those messages side by side with Megan's caring responses. So it begs the question for you, could these messages have been a red flag?
It's easy to say that in hindsight, but for someone in the moment, caught up in the emotions of a relationship, those red flags can be hard to see.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when someone is presenting a certain version of themselves.
Yeah.
Like Ross seemingly did.
Right.
Now, let's turn our attention to the night of August 6, 2021, the night of the murder.
So Megan told her parents that she was meeting Ross for a walk, headed to his house. His parents happened to be out that evening, which again becomes significant later. Initially, things seemed normal. They were chatting, laughing, but then Ross suggested they move to the living room.
And this is where the atmosphere appears to shift. According to what you've provided, they had a sexual encounter.
Yeah.
And it seems Megan was a willing participant.
Right.
She trusted him, had no reason to fear him at that point.
But then everything changed. Ross claims that during intimacy, he was overcome by what he described as a volcanic rage, attributing it to his past traumas, and in this fit of rage, he strangled Megan to death.
It's a brutal act, and what happens after is even more disturbing. He went to the kitchen, grabbed a carving knife, and stabbed Megan 14 times in the neck.
Oh my God.
He later claimed that he did this to make sure she was dead, a detail that to me raises serious questions about premeditation.
Right.
This wasn't just a loss of control. There seems to be a very deliberate and cold element to his actions.
And what he did next kind of really cements that feeling. Ross took very calculated steps to cover up his crime.
Okay.
Wrapped Megan's body in a duvet, put her in the passenger seat of her own car, and drove to a secluded area near Woodhouse Eaves where he dumped her body.
And then disposed of her phone, abandoned her car, changed his clothes, got rid of any blood-stained items. It seems like he was very meticulous in his efforts to erase any evidence of what he had done.
And it's almost unbelievable, but he didn't stop there. While he was disposing of Megan's body, he was sending her fake affectionate text messages.
Wow.
Things like, "You were amazing. Did you get home safe?"
It's fascinating the level of manipulation and deception going on here.
Right.
It's a chilling example of how someone can present a completely fabricated persona to the outside world.
Yeah. Why do you think he did that?
It seems like a deliberate attempt to buy himself time.
Yeah.
Mislead investigators, make it seem like he had nothing to do with Megan's disappearance.
Meanwhile, her family is becoming increasingly worried.
Right.
She's not answering her phone. Her messages are going unread.
Of course.
Totally out of character for her.
Yeah.
So by the next morning, they reported her missing to the police.
And this is where Ross's performance really takes center stage.
Right.
He plays the part of the concerned friend, perfectly participates in searches, expresses worry to everyone.
It's like he was trying to insert himself into the narrative of a concerned friend.
It speaks to his manipulative tendencies, wouldn't you say?
It does. But as the investigation progressed, the police started to notice inconsistencies in his story.
Okay.
Things weren't adding up. His alibi was weak. His demeanor was suspicious.
And that's when the evidence starts to mount against him.
Yeah.
CCTV footage places him at key locations. Forensic analysis links him to the crime scene. And those text messages reveal a very different picture than the one he was trying to present.
And that brings us to kind of a key turning point, the interrogation. Under pressure, Ross confesses to killing Megan, but insists it was an act of sudden rage triggered by PTSD.
And this becomes the foundation of his legal defense.
Okay.
He pleads guilty to manslaughter, not murder,
Right.
arguing that his mental state at the time of the killing meant he couldn't have formed the intent required for a murder charge.
So for our listener, manslaughter is a less serious charge than murder, often applied when a killing occurs without premeditation or malice aforethought.
Right.
But the prosecution saw it differently. They argued that the premeditation evident in the cover-up, along with the brutality of the act itself, demonstrated a clear intent to kill. They challenged the validity of his PTSD claim, highlighting that there was no prior record of him seeking help for these alleged traumas.
That's a really important point. It becomes a battle of narratives.
Right.
Was Ross a truly troubled individual who snapped, or was he a calculating killer? The jury had to decide which narrative was more believable.
Meanwhile, the community is reeling.
Yeah.
They rallied around Megan's family, organized searches, held vigils. I think it's important to pause here and acknowledge the very real human cost of this case.
Yes.
A young life was senselessly taken,
Absolutely.
leaving behind a grieving family and a community in shock.
It's crucial to remember that while we're dissecting the details of the case, there are real people whose lives have been irrevocably changed.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the legal arguments and the evidence, but we can't lose sight of the human element.
With that in mind, let's move on to the verdict and the sentencing. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Ross McCullum guilty of murder.
Wow.
He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 23 years.
A sense of justice was served, but as we know, no verdict can truly bring Megan back.
This has been heavy, and I think we need to take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far.
Yeah.
This case brings up so many important questions, and in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore those questions in more detail.
You know, as we reflect on Megan's case, I keep thinking about those disturbing text messages from Ross, the ones with the violent and misogynistic undertones.
Right.
Makes you wonder, how can we get better at recognizing those red flags, not just in romantic relationship, but in any relationship?
That's what really gets to me. You know, it's easy to look back and see those red flags so clearly.
Yeah.
But how do we spot them in the moment when we're caught up in the day-to-day,
Right.
especially with someone like Ross who seemed to be putting on a front?
It's a challenge, for sure. Those signs are often subtle.
Right.
And we may explain them away, especially when we want to believe the best in someone.
Like Megan, she was so focused on being there for Ross, on offering support, that she might have missed those warning signs, or maybe she saw them, but chose to believe his version of himself.
That's a really important point. It highlights the need for self-awareness in relationships. We need to be aware of our own biases, our tendencies to see the good in people, even when there might be evidence to the contrary.
Right.
It's not about being cynical, but about having a healthy sense of skepticism.
So aside from those text messages, what other red flags should we be looking out for?
Well, there are a few key things to consider.
Okay.
First, does the person's behavior align with their words?
Right.
Are they saying one thing but doing another? Another thing to look out for is patterns of manipulation or control.
Okay.
Does the person try to isolate you from your friends and family? Do they constantly try to put you down or make you feel bad about yourself?
That makes sense. It's about paying attention to the overall dynamic of the relationship, not just isolated incidents.
Exactly. And most importantly, do you feel safe and respected in this relationship?
Right.
If the answer to that question is no, then it's time to seriously reassess the situation.
And that's where it gets tricky, right? Because leaving a relationship can be really hard, especially if you're emotionally invested.
It can be incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to have a support system in place, people you can talk to.
Yeah.
People who can offer an objective perspective.
Right.
Talking to a trusted friend, a family member, or even a therapist can be invaluable.
You mentioned therapy. This case also brings up the complex issue of mental health and its potential role in criminal behavior.
Yeah.
It's a sensitive topic, and I want to be clear that I'm not saying everyone with a mental health condition is violent or dangerous.
Of course not. That's a harmful generalization.
Yeah.
But it is important to acknowledge that untreated mental health issues can contribute to poor decision-making, impulsive behavior, and in some cases, violence.
Right.
It's not about assigning blame, but about understanding the complexities.
And in Ross's case, he used his alleged PTSD as a defense, claiming it caused him to snap and kill Megan. That raises the question, how do we balance accountability with compassion for those struggling with mental health?
That is a difficult question, and there are no easy answers.
Right.
On one hand, we need to hold people accountable for their actions, regardless of their mental state. But we also need to recognize that mental illness is a real thing, and it can have a profound impact on behavior.
It's like we need to find a way to address both the individual's needs and the safety of society as a whole.
Right. It's about finding that delicate balance between justice and rehabilitation.
Yeah.
We want to prevent these tragedies from happening in the first place, and that means addressing the root causes, including mental health.
So what can we do? What are some concrete steps we can take to create a safer, more supportive environment?
Well, one crucial step is breaking down the stigma surrounding mental health. It needs to be as acceptable to talk about anxiety or depression as it is to talk about a physical ailment. We need to create spaces where people feel comfortable seeking help without shame or judgment.
Absolutely. We need to shift the conversation from one of blame and judgment to one of understanding and support.
Yeah.
It's about fostering a culture of empathy.
And we need to invest in mental health resources, make therapy more accessible, train more professionals, and provide support services for those in crisis. It's not just about individual responsibility, it's about societal responsibility as well.
I agree. This is a systemic issue that requires a collective effort. But going back to the individual level, what advice would you give someone who might be concerned about their own mental health or the mental health of someone they care about?
First and foremost, don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Yeah.
There are resources available, even if you don't know where to start. Talking to a doctor, a therapist, or even a trusted friend can be a good first step.
Right.
There are also hotlines and online resources that can provide support and guidance.
What are some of the signs that someone might be struggling with their mental health? I think a lot of people might not even be aware of what to look for.
That's a great point. It's important to be aware of changes in behavior, such as withdrawal from social activities, changes in sleep or appetite, increased irritability, or difficulty concentrating.
Right.
These can be indicators that something is not right.
It's almost like we need to become more attuned to the emotional well-being of ourselves and those around us.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of awareness and open communication.
Yeah.
Where it's okay to not be okay, and where seeking help is seen as a sign of strength, not weakness.
You know, it's easy to get caught up in the details of a case like this, the legal arguments, the evidence.
Yeah.
But what we can't lose sight of is the human cost.
Yeah.
Megan Newborough was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She had dreams, aspirations, a whole life ahead of her.
And her life was tragically cut short.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder of the devastating impact of violence and the importance of addressing the factors that contribute to it.
Her family has been incredibly strong and vocal in advocating for change. They've set up a foundation in Megan's name, working to raise awareness about domestic violence and promote healthy relationships.
That's a testament to their strength and resilience. They've chosen to channel their grief into something positive,
Right.
something that might help prevent other families from experiencing this kind of loss.
It's inspiring, isn't it? Even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, they're finding a way to make a difference.
It speaks to the power of human connection and the importance of finding meaning in the face of adversity.
Yeah.
It also highlights the need for continued dialogue and action to address these critical issues. What we've talked about today, recognizing red flags, supporting mental health, promoting healthy relationships,
Right.
these are all part of a larger effort to create a safer and more just world.
This has been a challenging conversation, but I think it's been an important one.
Like-
It's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths and to ask ourselves some tough questions about our own relationships, our own behaviors, and our role in creating a more compassionate society.
And that's what I hope listeners take away from this deep dive.
Yeah.
A renewed sense of awareness, a commitment to personal growth, and a determination to make a positive impact on the world around them.
I think that's a perfect way to wrap up part 2.
Yeah.
When we come back for part 3, we'll delve into some more specific takeaways from this case and explore what each of us can do to move forward in a positive direction. So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into Megan's story, I keep coming back to this question, like, what can we actually learn from all of this?
Yeah, like that's the heart of it, right?
Yeah.
If we can't extract meaning,
Yeah.
if we can't take this and turn it into positive action,
Right.
then, what was the point of all of this?
Exactly. And it has been emotionally heavy, but one of the things that's really kind of stuck with me is this idea of trusting our gut instincts. We talked about red flags before, but sometimes it's not even a clear red flag. It's just this
That inner voice?
Yeah, the inner voice. Yeah.
We all have it. But the question is, how often do we actually listen?
Exactly. And it's so easy to dismiss it, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it involves someone we care about.
Especially then,
We want to see the good in them, believe their version of events.
And that's where self-awareness becomes so crucial.
Yeah.
We need to be conscious of our own biases, our tendencies to maybe rationalize someone's behavior, even when the evidence suggests otherwise.
It's like we need to develop that healthy skepticism.
Yeah.
Not to become suspicious of everyone, but to be able to kind of step back and assess the situation objectively and ask ourselves those tough questions.
Yeah.
Does this person's behavior match their words?
Right.
Are there patterns of manipulation or control that I'm maybe overlooking? Am I truly feeling safe and respected in this relationship?
And if the answer to any of those questions is no, that's when we need to take action.
Right. And that might be a conversation. It might be setting boundaries. It might be seeking outside help.
Talking to someone we trust.
Yeah.
A friend, family member, therapist.
Right.
Can provide that crucial external perspective. Sometimes when we're so in it.
Yeah.
It's hard to see.
Yeah. You can't see the forest for the trees.
Can't see the forest for the trees. That's right.
Another thing that really stood out to me in this case was the role of technology.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, over 3,500 text messages. That's an incredible volume of communication.
A lot.
And on one hand, it creates this detailed record of their relationship, almost like a digital fingerprint.
Yeah. It reveals patterns, inconsistencies, even those warning signs that might have been missed in everyday interaction.
Right.
It's like having a window into their communication dynamic.
Exactly. But it also makes me reflect on how much we communicate through text and social media these days.
Oh, absolutely.
And, there's a potential for disconnect there between what we type and how we actually feel.
It's easier to hide behind a screen, isn't it?
Right.
To craft an image that isn't necessarily authentic.
Exactly.
And that makes it even harder to truly understand someone's intentions.
Which brings us back to the importance of those face-to-face conversations.
Yeah.
Those moments where we can really connect on a human level.
Absolutely.
Paying attention to body language, tone of voice, all those nonverbal cues that can reveal so much.
And to create space for vulnerability, honesty, and real connection.
Right.
That's what ultimately protects us, not just from potential harm, but from the loneliness and isolation that can make us more susceptible to manipulation.
This deep dive has been tough.
Yes, it has.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's also been an incredibly powerful reminder that knowledge is power.
It is.
The more we understand about these complex issues, the more equipped we are to protect ourselves and the people we care about.
And to advocate for change. To push for better resources, education, support systems, so that hopefully fewer people have to go through what Megan and her family experienced.
So to our listener, I want to leave you with this thought.
Yeah.
What can you do starting today to create a safer, more informed, more compassionate world?
Absolutely.
It starts with each of us.
It does.
Taking responsibility for our actions, for our relationships, reaching out to support those who may be struggling.
That's the kind of legacy that truly honors Megan's memory.
Yeah.
And gives meaning to this terrible loss.
Yeah.
It's about turning tragedy into a catalyst for positive change.
Well said. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.